And so that comes to the question, are they done? Just like Hitler, who rose, and just like Castro, who rose, there's a combination of the skill and talents of the Bolsheviks, plus some lucky opportunities. Kornilov's attempted coup. This is Kornilov, above me right here, and he took 6 regiments and decided he was going to take over the government. At one point, he was allied with Kerensky, the leader of the provisional government, but then Kerensky got worried about what was happening, and Kerensky needed help. And he needed to call upon the one group he didn't want to call upon for help. He had to call upon the Soviet and the banned and outlawed Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks and supporters of the Soviet were given weapons, and now the Bolsheviks were allowed to operate again, and they did not return the weapons, which set things up for a later coup. The trains carrying the troops of Kornilov were stopped, and the railway workers began to talk to them and debate with them. And in one way, in a sense, TOK stopped this coup because the railway workers argued with the soldiers that why were they attempting to overthrow the Soviet when the Soviet actually represented them. And you can get another example of how bad things were getting in Russia. You can see in March, the ration was 1 pound of bread per day. By April, it was 1/8 of a pound. And then we get into the July days. September, things were improving again. They were getting 1/2 pound. And by October, people were down to 1/4 of a pound. They're hungry. They're unhappy with the provisional government. So they're going to be willing to listen to the Bolsheviks. And they might be willing also to have a spontaneous revolution as they'd had in February. So let's look at the continuing problems with the provisional government. The lower classes, as we can see, have become alienated from the government. The war was still on. There was no land reform. There were no elections properly scheduled. There was little improvement in working conditions. And the prices, which had been very high in January 1917 and prompted that revolution, they were 300% higher from 1914 levels. And in October, when Lenin felt it was time to seize power, prices had gone up by 755%. And in August, there were changes in the factories. Workers were allowed to be fired, and workers' committees were not allowed to meet during the workday, as they had before. All of this meant that the lower classes and the workers to whom the Bolsheviks appealed did not give their support to the provisional government, and they were not pleased with what was happening. Now, to go back to what had happened and why Lenin hadn't appealed to these people, we have to look at the April Thesis that he brought with him, in a sense, on the trains that came from Switzerland through Germany to Russia. Simply, his message was bread, peace, and land, and he also wanted all power to the Soviets. Additionally, there'd be no cooperation with the provisional government, because he saw them too closely allied with and being part of the bourgeoisie and the upper classes. Plus, if he didn't ally with them, then they couldn't be blamed for their mistakes. Hello, yes, I have changed my clothes. We had some technical difficulties there. So just cut off partway through looking at Lenin's April Thesis. And remember, it's bread, peace, and land, all power to the Soviets, no cooperation with the provisional government, and when the revolution comes, the Bolsheviks will lead it, in part because of the April Thesis. So Lenin travels to Russia from Switzerland by way of Germany. The Germans send him there on a sealed train. Trotsky hears of the revolution and the changes in February, and he'll return from New York. Remember, this train with Lenin is sealed just because they're afraid of the dangers of communism. Germany will have its own Spartacist communist uprising in 1919. They feel, the German powers that be, feel like it's sending a virus into Russia to take it out of the war. And Lenin is a leading Bolshevik, and again, he is against the war, so their hope is that he will either disrupt the country or take control of the country and take it out of the war. And this will also relate to some later accusations, which come in this picture here, where you can see Kaiser Wilhelm II scheming in the background with the Bolsheviks with their purse of German money, and they are forcing their will upon the Russian people in Russia. And the caption from this British magazine is "Betrayed." Now, in terms of the April thesis, we can see here that Lenin, and these are parts from it, there's no support for provisional government. You can read the details about the utter falsities of all its promises should be made clear, particularly those relating to the renunciation of annexations, exposure in places of the impermissible, illusion-breeding demand that this government, a government of capitalists, should cease to be an imperialist government. Elsewhere in the April thesis, you can see that he says that there's a recognition of the fact in most of the Soviet workers' deputies of our party is in a minority and is against the party of all petty bourgeois opportunists. The masses must be made to see that the Soviet workers' deputies are the only possible form of revolutionary government. And as long as we are in the minority, he's saying at the last sentence here, we carry on the work of criticizing, exposing errors at the same time as we preach the necessity of transferring the entire state power to the Soviet of Workers' deputies so that the people may overcome their mistakes by experience, or all power to the Soviets. And then finally, there are other clauses that deal with banking, another one that deals with the imperialistic war. 6 deals with the fact of landed estates. They're going to confiscate all the landed estates. There's going to be nationalization of all lands in the country. The land to be disposed by the local Soviets of agricultural laborers and peasants' deputies. So again, he's saying bread, peace, and land. This is the land part of it. He's not saying exactly how it's going to happen, but he's making a promise to those peasants that they will get land.